Boy, there's a lot I could talk about today. Brian Laundrie's body appears to have been discovered in the Myakkahatchee Park, which it's in the same general area as Carlton Reserve and all that. But I don't think I'll talk about Brian Laundrie. I've never talked about Brian Laundrie on this channel anyway. I find it interesting because I'm here in Florida, so I kind of it's local news for me. So I talk about it a lot with people, in everyday life, but it doesn't really fit the subject of this channel. Then there's also old Dave Chappelle is getting canceled by Big Gay, which is pretty funny. Being a black guy is no longer good enough for the woke cult. They're not going to bow down at you. You don't have enough clout points as a black man to escape the ire of Big Gay. You must bow down at their altar. They're higher than you on the social justice pyramid. But I don't think I'm going to talk about Dave Chappelle either, because I kind of try to avoid just pure culture war stuff. Although I find this particular case very interesting, because Dave Chappelle is not an enemy I think that they want to make. Dave Chappelle has, he has pop culture cred going back far enough and deep enough in this country. I think that if he was turned fully into not just someone who's not a part of the club, of the woke club, if he was turned into, a hardened anti-wokester, that would be a big win for us normal people here in America, and it'd be a big L for the 20-somethings who are walking out of Netflix today trying to get people to denounce Dave Chappelle. But again, I don't want to talk about that, although I guess I've already talked about these two things, even if slightly. What I actually want to discuss is, again, something that I try not to do too much on this channel, and that is a pure politics story. And that is what's going on right now with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Because it is important who controls the Senate, and it's interesting what's going on with Manchin and Sinema is sort of a microcosm of the broader political shifts here in America. And I think that what's happening with Manchin and Sinema is very similar to what's happening with Dave Chappelle, and it's that now I don't want to say leftism because this is definitely separate. This is not like, oh, the Democrats are so far left they can't have people like Manchin, Sinema, or Dave Chappelle around. It's not about that. It's a cultural thing, and it's the culture of the left half of America, of liberals generally, has become monolithic, and there is no room for swing votes anymore. On that side of the aisle, you can't have people who have their own opinions and maybe use foul language like Dave Chappelle. You can't have people you can't have politicians who are elected in difficult political circumstances who therefore have to make rather unorthodox decisions when it comes to how they vote in the Senate, like Sinema and Manchin. It's not like Manchin and Sinema are hard right-wingers or something. It's just that they're looking at their electoral prospects and they say, gee, I can't go along with everything that my party wants and still win in my state. That's the calculation they're making. Now, you might point to Mark Kelly in Arizona and say, well, Mark Kelly is not worried about, re-election. He is being a good, loyal Democrat and just voting the party line. And that's true, but Mark Kelly is an astronaut. His wife was a congresswoman who survived an assassination attempt. He has some star power of his own. He can get away with some of that. Kind of like, how John McCain could get away with doing whatever he wanted, because he could just wave his bloody shirt at people and say, if you criticize me, obviously you don't respect the troops. Mark Kelly can wave his wife's dirty blouse, or bloody blouse. Did I say dirty shirt earlier? I meant bloody shirt. He can wave his wife's bloody blouse, and he can, wave his spacesuit around in the air and say, see these two things here? You're not allowed to criticize me. So Mark Kelly has a bit more latitude to do whatever he wants. Sinema, what does she have going for her on the identity spectrum? Well, she's quote-unquote bisexual. And if you haven't noticed, white women in politics in the Democratic Party increasingly are identifying as bisexual so that they have sort of a somewhat minority status, because just being a woman isn't enough anymore on the left, just like being a black man on the left is not enough anymore to make you special. So I don't even know if Sinema is in a relationship with a woman or anything. She might be like Governor Kate Brown of Oregon, who's actually married to a man with children, but identifies as bisexual for political reasons. And just saying, hey, I'm bisexual, that's not going to be enough for Sinema to carry herself. So she has to forge her own political identity. Mark Kelly has a political identity. He's an astronaut, and his wife survived an assassination attempt. That's a big profile. Sinema needs to build her own. She is trying to go to build this maverick persona, similar to what McCain and Goldwater had. Even though obviously politically McCain and Goldwater were at opposite ends of the of the political spectrum of the Republican Party, Sinema is, I guess, probably pretty close to John McCain, because she's on the I guess she'd be considered the far right of the Democratic Party now. She's opposing tax cuts and all these things now, putting the kibosh on the Build Back Better agenda. She did that epic thumbs down when it came to raising the minimum wage. She just kind of waltzed into the Senate floor, and I can't do the pose since you can't see what I'm doing, but she kind of did a little twist of her hips and went with thumbs down, and then waltzed right back out, and it was beautiful. But the average liberal activist doesn't understand this, much in the same way that I think that the average Republican did not understand John McCain, why he did what he did. Although, again, John McCain could kind of get away with being on the far left of the Republican Party because, one, he was very pro-war, so he could always hold that up and say, well, look, I'm conservative, I voted for the Iraq War. I wanted to invade 10 other countries too. I want to bomb Iran. So McCain could always had that going for him back in the day, and he won very convincing victories. When he was in the Senate. So he was whatever his style was, it obviously was popular in Arizona. And so even though the Republican base, for my entire life, hated John McCain with a passion, because being in what was for such a long time a red state like Arizona, there was no reason for him to politically be liberal. It's not like he was Susan Collins up in Maine, deep blue Maine, trying to win as a Republican in a very liberal state. McCain was in a very conservative state, and he took advantage of his popular public profile to vote to the left of his constituency consistently. And a lot of people on the left feel like Sinema is doing the same thing, that Sinema doesn't have to be this right-wing, that she can win, and that she has to energize the left-wing base, or not even the left-wing base, really just the liberal base. I mean, it's not the leftists that she has to worry about even that much. The liberals hate her, and they don't like to be abandoned by her. But the left is not nearly as good at dealing with this. You would never see bands of Republicans going out and harassing John McCain in the men's room. You do see that with Sinema. Leftists, or I shouldn't, again, I don't want to say this about leftists, because this is about mainstream Democrat politics. Liberals are much more active when it comes to these sorts of things than conservatives. John McCain could walk down any street in America and he didn't have to worry about getting socked in the face. Sinema, not so much. And because of that, it's not going to be so easy for her to do what she's trying to do as a Democrat. I think, and I'm not the first who said this, but I think it's a good point, that Sinema would not be getting the same amount of hate if she were a Republican. In the same way that, again, John McCain, if he were a Democrat, Republicans would not hate him as much as they did. But again, Republicans, to the extent that Republicans hated John McCain, they weren't going to go out and bash his head in or harass him at dinner. And so as Sinema continues to buck the trend of the Democratic Party, there is a possibility. I don't think that she would become a Republican. I think that that is too far. But I do think the possibility of Sinema switching and becoming an independent is a real possibility. And this would upset the balance in the Senate, particularly if we see something similar happen with Joe Manchin, where it's even more likely at this point. But I wanted to talk about Sinema first because I do think that it is also likely in her case. And even if just one, either Sinema or Manchin, crosses the aisle to caucus with Republicans, even if they're a registered independent. Now, I think that it's possible that Sinema switches her affiliation to independent and caucuses with the Democrats, which is what Bernie did forever, long before he was ever, a friend of the Democrats. Now Bernie basically is a Democrat. So I think we could see Sinema go that route. And what's getting leaked today about Joe Manchin is that he might switch his registration to independent, and this part hasn't come out, but the implication is that he would caucus with the Republicans. Now, the reason for this, I think, is quite obvious. Joe Manchin is in one of the most red states in America now. He's a vestige of the old Democratic Party in West Virginia, which has withered away over the last few years. West Virginia very rapidly shifted from being a deep blue state to being a deep red state, not because the people in West Virginia changed. They did not replace the population of West Virginia, a bunch of Democrats, with Republican voters, which is how they normally turn red states blue. No, what happened was the people in this blue state decided, you know what, no, we fit more into the Republican coalition now, and so that's how we vote. And so it was a simple, shifting of coalitions, of political coalitions here in America, and so people in West Virginia shifted that direction, as have all the politicians in West Virginia. I believe, if not the current governor, the last governor in West Virginia was elected as a Democrat, and during his term switched to being a Republican, because the same people who voted for him as a Democrat were now Republicans too, and so he moved in the same direction as his voters. This is the shift that's happened. Joe Manchin, I believe, was governor before he was senator in West Virginia. He was elected to the Senate back in 2010 as a Democrat. It was more realistic back then. So I believe he should be up for re-election in 2022. I should have double-checked that before I clicked record, but let's just say for the sake of the argument, whenever, Joe Manchin is going to have a tough time winning as a Democrat in West Virginia. Now, would it make sense? Would I be shocked if he just flipped overnight to become a Republican? No, I don't think that would be nuts. But in order to stroke his own ego and make himself feel a bit more important, I think that something that Manchin could do would just switch to becoming an independent who caucuses with the Republicans. So then you kind of still have an even split. Or actually, no, you wouldn't. What am I saying? Because Sinema is currently caucusing with the Democrats, so, if she stayed caucusing with the Democrats, that wouldn't affect the balance, but Manchin crossing the aisle and going to the Republicans would hand control of the Senate over to the Republicans, even prior to the midterm elections. And so an independent Sinema and an independent Manchin would not at all be surprising to me. I guess there's also the third possibility that they choose to caucus with no party. I believe you can do that. I don't know why you would be forced to caucus with either the majority or the minority. If you're from a third party, for example, if there was an elected or a green or a libertarian or a green that got elected to the Senate, I doubt they would want to caucus with the Republicans or the Democrats. I think they would want to sit by themselves. But no matter how the details shake out, it's pretty clear that Manchin and Sinema are not welcome in today's Democratic Party. That is not, I'm not breaking any news by saying that. And so the current state of affairs is not super sustainable. And I think that Manchin and Sinema know that if the Republicans take back the majority in the 2022 midterms, which I think is probably quite possible, it's already a 50-50 Senate, and 2022 is probably, by just historical, history-wise, the sitting president's party does not do well in midterm elections. This midterm is going to swing towards the Republicans, so if the Republicans just pick off one more seat, they have a majority in the Senate. And when that happens, Manchin and Sinema will no longer be, these all-important swing votes, getting the Democrats up to 50-50. And so they will be in a worse position politically as Democrats once the Republicans take power. And so they might have, maybe more power if in the short term, they cross the aisle themselves and endear themselves to the Republicans, because Republicans are quite accommodative to people like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. You see Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins. Lisa Murkowski is from a deep red state, and she's, almost the most liberal Republican, right there with Susan Collins. And so Manchin and Sinema would be right at home with those two. The Republicans even tolerate Mitt Romney being in the Senate. And so politically, for Manchin, it makes sense to be a Republican, and just from an ease of life standpoint for both of them. I think that they would be happier as Republicans, because let's face it, politicians, these are people who want to just have a nice life. These are greedy people. These are people who want to be liked. Joe Manchin loves being the swing vote. He loves, Manchin and Sinema at this point are at the height of their careers, because every time that the Democrats want to get something through the Senate, they go and they sit Manchin and Sinema down, and they pull out their checkbook and they say, I can write down all sorts of numbers in this box. So name your price, we will buy you off. Just give us what we want, give us your vote. And what little tolerance there is for Manchin and Sinema right now, because they're so important, will be gone once the Democrats lose their majority, because then Sinema and Manchin will no longer be super important, and the Democrats will be able to come down harder on them. And so they see that the majority is going to shift in favor of the Republicans in probably the House and the Senate in 2022. And so if they go with the flow, their life is just going to be easier. That's how I would look at it if I were them. And certainly in the case of Manchin, would be very surprised if Manchin is, come 2023, is still a Democrat. And so therefore, with Sinema, once Manchin's gone, I guess then Sinema could be the one lone, swing vote in the Democrat Party, so she could say, oh, well, now I'm more powerful because there's not even Joe Manchin around, I'm the only one. Maybe you'd get a little lonely. And so I wouldn't be shocked to see her shift either. So considering that this was a political discussion, and I normally don't like to cover straight politics on this channel because I feel like it's too shallow of a topic, I managed to go on for 18 minutes here. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.